Hi, happy Hanukkah. Welcome to another episode of the Caroline Glick Show. I'm broadcasting today from the JNS studios in Jerusalem for the first time, so it's a work in progress. Please stick with us. Um, it seems like every day there's another story about a Jew being harassed on a U.S. college campus. I just checked the headlines this morning and I saw two. There was a Wall Street Journal article about a Jewish student at Rutgers University in New Jersey who reported having to take back ways and secret passageways to get to class and to hide her Magen David necklace, her Star of David necklace, in order to avoid being harassed on her way to class every day. This is a par for the course. Another one was Colgate University in New York State. Students vandalized the campus menorah, and in their defense, they said, well, we were just drunk at the time. We didn't really mean it, or we were just drunk at the time. And, people scratch their heads and say, what are we supposed to do? And how do we handle the fact that anti-Semitic harassment of Jewish students on college campuses throughout the United States doubled after Hamas's latest campaign against Israel, that was joined by Arab Israelis in May 2021? How are we supposed to handle this deluge of hate that Jews are victimized by basically every day from coast to coast in the United States? And, people have come up with a lot of different ways to do it. One of the ways that people think of doing it is to say, okay, listen, we're pro-peace. We support a Palestinian state. Professor Alan Dershowitz always says, we are pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian. We're both. And birthright trips, for instance, have long avoided crossing the 1949 armistice lines. They don't take students, they don't take birthright travelers to Israel on these programs across and to see the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria because they're pro-peace, because they're pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian. AIPAC brings senators and congressmen to Israel where they meet with Israelis and with Palestinians to show that they're really for both sides. And all the major Jewish organizations in the United States and Hillel International all support the so-called two-state solution. So here they are, pro-peace, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, and yet levels of anti-Semitism on college campuses just continue to grow. To Jewish protestations of being pro-Israel and pro-Palestinians, the anti-Semites on college campuses say that they are Jewish imperialists, Jewish supremacists. They are Zionists. Zionism is racism. They are racist Zionism, Zionist colonialists. In other words, they don't care. The anti-Semites on campus really couldn't care less what the Jews are saying and how pro-peace they are. How do we understand this then? What is all of this about? Why are Jews being hounded as Zionists on college campuses? Well, we got a really good sense of the answer last month with the publication of a really important news study by the Amcha Initiative, a very important initiative for fighting anti-Semitism on college campuses, founded by Tammy Rossman Benjamin, I think in 2002, in response to a rash of pogrom-like violence against Jewish students at the height of the Palestinian terror campaign against Israel that year. And what they do is they take a very, very close look at what's happening on campus. So Rossman Benjamin, together with her co-author, Layla Beckworth, came out with a new study last month that's called Anti-Semitism on Campus, the Assault on Jewish Identity. And what they found was hidden behind the 2,000 or so assaults on Jewish students that took place in the United States on college and university campuses last year, lies a much larger and much more insidious campaign. And that campaign is a frontal assault on Jewish identity itself on college campuses and then through college campuses into American society. And what their study showed was that there are really three components to the assault on Jewish identity in campus. The goal, by the way, of this assault is to end Jewish life on campus, Jewish communal life on campus. And we'll talk, and I'll get to exactly how this is done in a minute. But there are three groups who all participate in this campaign to wipe out Jewish identity on U.S. college campuses. The first one are the faculty members who support the boycott, divestiture, and sanctions campaigns against Israel, which again are campaigns not to cause Israel economic damage so much as to isolate and ostracize Jews who support Israel on campuses. They're really the direct victims of the BDS campaigns on campus. Israel, we don't feel it one way or another if BDS is massively popular or supported or powerful on Harvard University campus or University of Chicago campus or University of Michigan campus. Israelis don't feel it at all. The people who feel the brunt of the BDS campaign, of course, are American Jews and American Jewish students who are the ones that are directly targeted. So BDS pretends that it's about Israel, but really it's about Jews that are tangible, that are right there in your face on campus, whether they're faculty or students or visitors. So the first component, the first group that is advancing the assault on Jewish identity on campuses are the faculty members who support BDS. And what the study found was that if there are 5 or more faculty members who are part of the BDS campaign to demonize Israel and its American Jewish supporters on a particular campus, then the tendency to see these kinds of incidents of assaults on Jewish identity increases fourfold. The second component, the second group that's that's involved, engaged in wiping out, assaulting Jewish identity on U.S. college campuses are the Students for Justice in Palestine types. They're members of non-Jewish anti-Zionist organizations that promote an anti-Zionist, or pro-BDS campaign to vilify and demonize Israel and its Jewish supporters on campus. So, their largest group, of course, is Students for Justice in Palestine, that has branches across America and is organized by Hamas supporters and was really the brainchild of Hamas supporters in Berkeley and in other places, that was organized in a way as a Hamas front, according to a report by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, I think in 2018 it came out. At any rate, so you have Students for Justice in Palestine and their campaigns. And then the third group that's engaged in this are Jewish anti-Zionist organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace. And Jewish organizations that participate in the anti-Zionist push, in the pro-BDS push, serve as fig leaves, legitimators of the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish operations being organized and pushed forward most openly and aggressively by the non-Jewish BDS organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine, and also by faculties that use their departments to push, to promote this agenda of destroying Jewish identity. So having identified the actors that are engaged, again, the faculty that support BDS, that are opposed to Israel, that advocate for anti-Zionism, for the demonization, delegitimization, and destruction of the Jewish state, are the first ones. The second ones are the anti-Israel BDS organizations that are not Jewish, and the third one are the Jewish organizations that are anti-Israel, pro-BDS, anti-Zionist. Okay, so those are the three groups who are participating, and then the question is, well, what do they do? What does it mean that you want to cancel, you want to assault Jewish identity on college campuses? Well, there are three components to that as well. The first component is redefining Judaism. And this is where we begin to enter into the rabbit hole in this Alice in Wonderland kind of universe that they're creating on campuses in relation to Jews. So the first concept of redefining Judaism involves asserting that Zionism, that is the attachment of Jews to the land of Israel, support for Israel on the part of Jews who live in the diaspora, and the right of the Jews to self-determination in our homeland, in the land of Israel, is a form of anti-Semitism. Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. Why? Because under the newly defined Judaism that these people are advocating on behalf of and that are pushing as authentic Judaism, Zionism is actually not a part of Judaism. It's not authentic Judaism. And of course, the fact is that from time immemorial, Judaism has three legs: the Torah, the land of Israel, that is Zionism, and the nation of Israel. Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, and Torat Yisrael have always been the three pillars of Zionism. So if you went to a Jew in Spain, if you went to a Jew in Germany, if you went to a Jew in Tunis, if you went to a Jew in South America, it doesn't matter. At any point in history over the past 2,500, 3,000 years, and you ask them how they felt about the land of Israel, they would say that their attachment to the land of Israel and to the people of Israel are strong, are really vital foundations of their Jewish identity. So what the anti-Zionists are saying, what the BDS people are saying, what the anti-Semites on campus are saying is that no. Millennia of Jewish history and identity across time and space, that Jews view Israel as a vital component of their Jewish identity, that's all a lie. Zionism is something that's been attached, that's exogenous to Jewish identity. It's sort of a colonialization of Jewish identity on the part of this nefarious group of people, fake Jews, who call themselves Zionists. And Zionism itself is a form of supremacy that's trying to dislocate authentic Judaism, and authentic Judaism has nothing to do with Zionism, with the land of Israel, or even with peoplehood of the Jewish nationhood and Jewish peoplehood. So in their redefined, invented Judaism, Zionism is an alien component that has nothing to do with actual Jews. So that's what they say. And then the people who are most important in pushing forward this agenda, of course, are the Jewish anti-Zionists, who say, oh, look, we don't have anything to do with Zionism. We're the authentic Jews. And the Jews who support Israel, that's 80% of American Jews, according to repeated, multi-year surveys, who say that attachment to Israel is a vital component to their Jewish identity, they're liars. And they're actually anti-Semites because they're trying to push this component, this alien concept of Zionism, on poor, unsuspecting Jews. So Jews are anti-Semites. Anti-Semites are philo-Semites. So this is the beginning of the created world that they invent to reinvent what it means to be Jewish. So Jewish identity now is anti-Zionism. Authentic Judaism is anti-Zionism. Then after they've done that, they denigrate any statement or any expression of Jewish identity that isn't part of their invented Judaism. So we see that Judaism, support for Israel, support for Jewish rights, all of these things are forms of racism and bigotry, Jewish supremacism, and a reason to harass and bully Jews. So Jews are denigrated on college campuses if they don't accept the invented concept of Judaism that's being pushed on them by these three groups: the faculty, the non-Jewish BDS organizations, and the Jewish BDS organizations. They're now being denigrated as racists, as white supremacists, as Jewish supremacists, as progressives. You can't be a progressive if you view the world through the traditional, through the authentic Jewish vantage point, because that's inauthentic Judaism. And so you're denigrated. And the third component of this, after redefining Judaism and and denigrating expressions of Judaism, is suppression. So suppression we saw most blatantly earlier this year when Berkeley Law School organizations announced a collective boycott of Zionists from speaking on college campuses, on the university campus, or speaking to law students. And this Zionist, it's not just me, Caroline Glick, God forbid, be invited to Berkeley to talk about Israel. It's a Jewish physicist talking about science and the law. Well, no, because he's Zionist, he's not allowed to talk about physics or quantum mechanics or whatever and the law, or computer scientists talking about high tech and the law. You can't have anybody who's actually supportive of Israel talking about anything, talking about contracts. You can't be a speaker on any subject at Berkeley Law School if you support Israel's right to exist. And that's all it means to be a Zionist as far as they're concerned. So anybody who doesn't accept their view of authentic Judaism being anti-Judaism is a Zionist, and they are therefore banned from speaking at Berkeley. You have other examples in the Amcha Initiative study that calls to boycott at University of Chicago professors and courses that they consider to be Zionist because they don't promote the anti-Zionist view that Israel has no right to exist. Obviously, attacking Jews trying to celebrate Israel Independence Day, or really anything Hanukkah that celebrates Jewish sovereignty and fight against tyranny. So these are the ways, and taken collectively, you see, that this is a sort of a whole spectrum, a full spectrum of assault on Jews. And the harassment that you see on college campuses every day is something that stems from this basic underlying campaign to wipe out Jewish identity. And then it works because if Jews complain to campus administrators, look, I'm being harassed, I can't go to class, I can't participate in the activities that I want to participate in, administrators say to them, yes, but being a Zionist is not being Jewish. You're not being discriminated because you're Jewish, because authentic Judaism is actually anti-Zionism, and therefore you don't deserve protection. And actually, by saying that your Zionism is a manifestation or an authentic expression of your Jewish identity, you're actually harassing the poor anti-Zionist Jews because they're the authentic Jews. And this happens over and over on college campuses. So students who are being harassed by these new Jews are being told that they themselves are the anti-Semites, because we've already discussed that Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. And so if you're a Zionist, you're actually suppressing legitimate Jews who are anti-Zionists. And so this is sort of how it all goes, and you end up in a closed circle where Jews are denied all protection and constantly made more and more vulnerable to assault because they don't really have a right to be there in the first place as Jews, because again, their Judaism isn't authentic, and the real authentic Judaism is anti-Semitism. So that's what we see. And then the question becomes, okay, so how do you deal with something like this? How are Jews supposed to be able to, how should they respond? How should that young woman at Rutgers handle the situation? Why that she's being hounded? Well, you have to look to what the goal is. So the goal here is to intimidate and harass and scare Jews into non-participation, into walking away from the Jewish community, walking away from their Jewish identity, and just being quiet and not saying anything, not making waves, maybe studying something that has nothing to do with Jewish subjects and hoping that if you keep your head down far enough that they'll just leave you alone and let you finish your degree, and then you go on with your life. It's Jews denying themselves the right to celebrate their Jewish identity, or deepen their Jewish identity, or learn, or do anything as Jews. Go to synagogue, do anything. Celebrate Hanukkah. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go to that lecture by so-and-so because, he's a Zionist and it's going to be picketed and I'll be attacked and harassed if I go. So I'm just not going to go. And that's that. So that's what they want Jews to do. And then the only Jewish expression that you'll have on campus, Jewish expression, is the anti-Zionist Jewish expression, because they're the Jews who are allowed to speak. Those are the Jews who are allowed to have a voice. Those are the Jews who are legitimate. And the question is, before I go into what Jews should do about this, you have to understand that there's an extra and very important component to it. So this isn't just anti-Semitism, in terms of harassing Jews, putting them down. It's also a marketing tool. It's a marketing tool to promote anti-Semitism among progressives. Just think about it. What are they actually doing here? Right? One of the worst things of the legacy of the Holocaust, a cognitive legacy of the Holocaust, is that over the years, it became very difficult for people to identify anti-Semitism absent the gas chambers, right? If you don't have Auschwitz, then it's not anti-Semitism. But over the millennia, most anti-Semitism that Jews have suffered from has not been the eradicationist kind of the Nazis. It hasn't been, to cart Jews away and annihilate them. It's been to persecute and humiliate them. And so we saw, and to turn them into whatever you're not supposed to be. So the Jews are constantly, forever being made the enemy of the people. So in Christendom, Jews were Christ killers, and Jews had to be humiliated and kept down because that was the way to show, as St. Augustine wrote, that God had walked away from his covenant with them and that the covenant had been transferred to adherents to Christianity. And Jews should remain, but they have to remain weak and persecuted and humiliated and ashamed and hopeless. And so that was how Jews were treated. They were persecuted. They were murdered from time to time, but they were allowed to live and humiliated. The same, by the way, in Islam, where Jews were treated as dhimmi, along the same concept, that they were perpetually in a state of subjugation and humiliation, as proof that Islam was a true faith. Under communism, we saw it as well. From Karl Marx on, communists were saying, well, we are the communists and the Jews are capitalists and they're rootless cosmopolitans. And so Jews were castigated as the enemy of the good because they were the exact opposite of what the good was defined as being. And under the progressive regime that controls campus discourse, there are two kinds of people you're supposed to hate. There are the racists who belong to whatever group is considered to be an oppressor group. And there are, or sexual orientation group, but there are those, right? And then on the other hand, you have right-wingers, otherwise known as conservatives, otherwise known as fascists. And the thing with Jews is that in the progressive mindset, Jews are in both groups. Jews are white, they're Jewish supremacists, they're racists, and they're also fascist, Zion-Nazis, etc. So Jews belong to both of those groups. And then anti-Semitism is instrumental for mobilizing progressives to become anti-Semitic. So the anti-Zionism on campus, the redefinition of Judaism, the denigration of Judaism, the suppression of expressions of Judaism, all of these things are not only in order to persecute Jews, but also to mobilize progressives to hate Jews and to transform completely progressive America, and through progressive America, the United States as a whole, into an anti-Semitic country, where the plight of Jews on campus becomes the plight of Jews everywhere in the United States. And that's ultimately what we're seeing unfold on campus, and increasingly we're seeing expressions of that. We saw we're seeing repeatedly actually on NBC, and comedians and Kanye West and all of them that are feeling more and more comfortable expressing denigration, reinvention, reconstitution, redefinition of what it means to be a Jew, and ultimately suppression of expressions of Judaism. So finally, what should Jews do? Well, I'm speaking to you now, we're recording this during Hanukkah, and Hanukkah really is a celebration of another Jewish revolt against cultural imperialism, because this is a form of cultural imperialism. Progressivism is, of course. And that cultural imperialism was Greek cultural imperialism. And the Greeks, supported by Hellenized Jews, were all about redefining Judaism. We're all about denigrating Judaism, and we're all about suppressing Judaism, right? You weren't allowed to observe Shabbat or keep kosher. You weren't allowed to circumcise your sons. They turned the temple in Jerusalem into a pagan temple, and they lifted up these anti-Jews as religious and political authorities in imperial Greek-controlled Judea. And so the Maccabean revolt was a revolt against cultural imperialism, colonialization. Again, it was a civil war against the Hellenized Jews. So obviously Jews don't want to go to war with one another. This isn't about a civil war. It's not even about an anti-colonial struggle in the sense of the Maccabees of using swords or pitchforks or what have you. It's about recognizing that there's no point in engaging. Just as a Jew in Leningrad couldn't argue with a commissar that he wasn't a rootless cosmopolitan or a capitalist, because nobody really cared about the truth. That wasn't the purpose of denigrating him as a capitalist and a rootless cosmopolitan. The purpose was to denigrate him and to attract others throughout Leningrad to hate him because he was a Jew, and Jews are rootless cosmopolitans. and capitalists. So here too, there's no point in Jews saying, I'm pro-peace, I'm pro-Palestinian. Look, Birthright won't take its participants to Hebron to see the tombs of the matriarchs and the patriarchs, or to Efrat to see where King David was raised. No, you're not, or to see where the Maccabean revolt took place in Gush Etzion. No, you're not allowed to do that, right? Because we were pro-Palestinian. So all of the places, Joshua's altar, in Samaria, we're not allowed to see any of those things that are our birthright in the land of Israel, because if you do, then you're not pro-Palestinian. So rather than doing all of these things that are impressing absolutely nobody on the other side, because they really couldn't care less, Jews should look inwards. We should build our own tent. We should stop trying to engage people who want to cancel us, who are canceling us, whether in the United States or anywhere else, but particularly on college campuses. Parents, students, American Jewish organizations, and Israeli consulates should all be working to help Jews on college campuses develop their identity and strengthen their identity and revel in their identity, because there is so much to celebrate about being authentic Jews, about being Zionists. There's so much wonderful things. It's such a wonderful identity. It's such a rich identity. It's such a true identity. And it's such an old identity that survived so much over so long. It's an inspiring story and an inspiring identity to have, which is why it's been sustained for so long. Because through all of the years of the persecution of exile, 2,000 odd years, 2,200 years since the Maccabean revolt, through all that period of dispersion, Jews have reveled in their identity because there is so much to celebrate. That's why we've survived. We haven't just survived because the anti-Semites won't let us assimilate. There's some of that. But the main reason is because Jews like being Jewish. And when you see, instead of embracing that and developing mechanisms on campus for Jews to do so happily, the most of the attention has been placed on, trying to come to a meeting of the minds, or even punishing anti-Semites. And this is becoming more and more difficult. So I think, my message for Hanukkah would be, it's important to try to figure out, and the Amcha initiative and a follow-on report that came out, I think, during the week of Hanukkah or the week before, they talk about different ways to use Title VI, Civil Rights Act, and also to use codes of conduct in the schools. And those are important to look at in terms of punishing anti-Semites on college campus. But I think the most important thing moving forward is really for Jews to just disengage from a conversation with them and instead start to have a conversation with themselves about how wonderful it is to be Jews, and to strengthen that Jewish identity and that Jewish community as we go forward. And I'm going to talk now, my guest for this week's show is Jason Greenblatt, who was President Trump's envoy for Middle East peace. He's an Orthodox Jew, and Jason really used his time in office to stand up to all of the people saying that something, this is what it means to be Jewish, this is what it means to be pro-Israel, this is what it means to make peace, this is what peace is. All of these things that were so false for so long, and he and his colleagues, Jared Kushner and David Friedman, and President Trump themselves did more for the state of Israel, for U.S.-Israel relations, and most importantly for the peace of the Middle East than any of their predecessors, and really all of their predecessors put together. I think that his tale and how he and his colleagues looked at the Middle East with fresh eyes and what they saw and how they moved things forward is really part and parcel of the entire idea that you can only really go forward in the world as Jews if you revel in your Jewish identity, if you appreciate it, and if you value it. And you won't value it by trying to come to terms with people who are trying to redefine what it means to be Jewish and redefine Judaism out of that definition. So without further ado, I want to turn this conversation to my conversation with Jason Greenblatt, and happy Hanukkah to all of us. I'm so pleased this week to be having Jason Greenblatt, who was President Trump's Middle East envoy, with me, because there's been a lot of stuff going on in terms of U.S. policy towards Israel and the way that Israel is being presented in the Middle East media. Just over the past couple of weeks since Israel had its elections, in the face of the incoming Netanyahu right-wing coalition, and I think that there's really nobody better to talk about Middle East peace processes such as they are Middle East peace processors who are doing some of the who are taking the lead in the charge against the incoming Israeli government, than Jason Greenblatt. Jason, first of all, thanks so much for joining me on the Caroline Glick Show. I'm glad to finally have you on.
Thanks so much for having me, Caroline. I've been an avid reader of your work since way before I joined the White House and continuing to this day. So it's really great to be here.
Well, that's why we always love the Trump administration because you guys are Caroline Glick readers. No, but seriously, folks, you should be Jason Greenblatt readers. I just finished this book, In the Path of Abraham, How Donald Trump Made Peace in the Middle East and How to Stop Joe Biden from Unmaking It. Very important book, both for the first person account and also for something that I really wanted to focus on with you, at least in the first part of our conversation, Jason, if you don't mind. You talk a lot in your book about the fact that you were an amateur, that you didn't have, you weren't a seasoned foreign policy hand. You didn't uh, um, go through the training at the knee of Dennis Ross and Martin Indyk and Dan Kurtzer, et cetera, Aaron David Miller, all of the people who were the envoys for the Middle East peace process for a bazillion years. George Mitchell was not the sundock at your child's bris, and all the rest of it. So you you guys came in, you, David Friedman, Jared Kushner, and others, and with no experience in Middle East peace making, and you made peace in the Middle East. You made the Abraham Accords. Um, and on the other hand, the peace processors who really have turned this into a cottage industry, talking about how to get the sides together and reach the conclusion that everybody knows has to be reached, which is Israel withdrawing to the 1967 lines or the 1949 armistice lines and giving that land to the PLO, that's really what we have to do, also giving up Jerusalem. So now these people who have been saying this for a generation are attacking Israel. Let's talk about that in a second. But first, can you just give a summary of why it is that you think that you guys were able to actually bring real peace rather than bring a peace process? And all of these people have been able to do is bring a peace process.
So first of all, I mean, it's a great question. We stayed away from the word process. We weren't interested in process. We were interested in results. We worked for a very unique president. Some of your listeners may love President Trump. Others may not like him. But he was a results-oriented person. And his direction to us was, if first of all, study this thing, understand it deeply, figure out a solution. And if we can't find a solution, we have other things to do. Jared was a big believer. One of his famous quotes to me often was, the sand in the hourglass is just going to keep going down, and we have a limited amount of time here. We didn't know, of course, if we'd have 4 years or 8 years. It turned out there was only 4 years. But our goal was not to waste time. Maybe the best example I could give you on that is a couple of weeks into my time at the White House, after I got partly educated by many of the former peace processors and State Department colleagues and national security colleagues, I said, I hear you about this two-state solution, and we could get into that terminology later in this discussion. But what about Gaza? What about the 2 million Palestinians who are subjugated by Hamas, an Iran puppet that just wants to destroy Israel? Even under the best of circumstances, if we could get then Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas into the room and we figure out a solution, that's a big if, of course. What happens with Gaza? And you know what the answer was? Shh, don't talk about Gaza. Don't talk about Hamas. We're not going to solve that. Let's just talk about the two-state solution. So we approached things differently. We weren't interested in wasting time. We had each been deal makers in our careers, and we weren't lifers in terms of a peace process. And either we were going to accomplish something or fail and then go home.
But so why do you think that they wanted to talk about the two-state solution and not about reality? They wanted to talk about their aspiration for an Israeli withdrawal from Judea and Samaria and the partition of Jerusalem between Israel and a Palestinian state. And they didn't want to talk about reality on the ground. Why do you think that is? I mean, you can't get to peace without some sort of relationship between what you're doing and what reality is on the ground.
Right. Also, very, very important. I mean, we never used the term two state solution. I think President Trump used it twice just in passing. Our view was peace between Israel and the Palestinians if it's achievable. The words two state solution mean nothing. They mean different things to different people. And when you study the conflict and you deeply understand the conflict, you realize it's a terrible terminology. It's a very flippant terminology. So why do they use it? Because it sounds nice. It's a great bumper sticker. It sounds nice to the heart, to the mind, to the ear. It sounds like something that's saleable, but it's not something that's achievable. And maybe the best example I give whenever I do my talks is if you're saying that a two state solution means you're going to demand that Israel give up territory that's not Palestinian, it might be disputed, it's not Palestinian, and tell Israel, one of our closest allies in the world, and certainly the key ally in the Middle East that helps keep security and stability in the Middle East. If you're going to tell Israel withdraw to those lines, and they're not borders, you use the correct terminology, not surprised, of course, but they're not the 67 borders, as another term that everybody uses that's wrong. If you're going to tell Israel to withdraw to that from that territory and close its eyes and cross its fingers and hope that all of a sudden peace is going to break out, that's a crazy idea. The more we educate people about that, the more people take a step back and think, oh, I understand now. I understand that Hamas has terror tunnels and throws rockets in Israel, and there's terrorism coming from Judea and Samaria, another terminology that we have to switch, this occupied Palestinian territory or occupied territory terminology that's a false terminology. If you don't educate people about what's going on, that phrase two state solution has gotten traction, tremendous traction, and it will continue to get traction because it sounds good and it's saleable, but it's not reality.
I mean, I started my remarks by saying there, or the question you, and then I said that all of these peace processors are now attacking Israel. You had an op-ed in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago by Dan Kurtzer and Aaron David Miller, telling the American government, telling the Biden administration, okay, now is the time to place a partial arms embargo on Israel as this government is formed and throw Israel to the jackals at the UN and the International Court of Justice. Um, why? Because this government, is not to our liking. This government, they said, is opposed to democracy, a government that was democratically elected. And I thought that it was a very revealing thing on their part because the government hasn't been formed yet, it hasn't been sworn in yet, and yet they're already saying, okay, now use the fact that that the Israeli people just elected this government to lead them as a justification for turning on Israel. And they even said, and it was interesting, is Israel is under like a full court press attack by them, by the liberal American leadership apparently, and by the New York Times, all using the same terminology. And Tom Friedman, that the peace process is quote moribund. They all use the same word. It's dead. And Tom Friedman even said that the concept of a two state is dead, but it can't be dead. It can't be dead. It must be alive, but it's dead. But we want it to be alive. But in the meantime, what America really has to do is turn on Israel because this is a terrible government. It's a horrible government. It hasn't been formed yet. So what are you talking about? So it feels like, and I wrote about this in Newsweek a few weeks ago. It feels like actually maybe these people just hate Israel. And like you say, the peace process, it doesn't lead to peace. It ignores reality, but it also puts the pressure on Israel to make concessions to the Palestinians. And now they say the peace process is dead. Well, now we have to really stick it to Israel. So it feels like all of these things are just fig leaves to justify an anti-Israel policy by the United States, which is what they're advocating in effect.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Washington Post piece, which was a terrible piece. That was preceded by a piece by Tom Friedman, who actually wrote two. I didn't read his recent piece. I'm sure it's just as bad as the one he wrote just before the Washington Post piece. The title of his piece then was "The Israel as We Knew It Is Over," which is a crazy idea. Um, I wrote a response to Tom in Arab News. Arab News is a Saudi-owned newspaper. I criticized the entire piece, and you know the headline that the Arab News put on it? I didn't choose the headline. The headline was Israel deserves more than this prophet of doom. So when you think about it, you have the New York Times attacking Israel, the Washington Post attacking Israel, Arab News actually standing by Israel. It's a little bit consistent. There was an article in the New York Times yesterday, I'm surprised, that for the Bahraini National Day and the Emirati National Day, they actually invited Ben Gvir and Smotrich. They may not have attended. I don't
Right.
remember what happened.
Oh,
There's a,
they did attend.
okay, there's a dichotomy between the New York Times, the past peace processors, and even how the Abraham Accords countries and those around the Abraham Accords are treating them. But people should read these pieces, and people should be writing angry letters to the editorial board at the Washington Post and at the New York Times. These articles are outrageous.
Yeah, no. Tom Friedman's new article is "What in the World is happening to Israel?" And I mean, it just goes on and on and on, right? They don't want they don't actually care about, again, that Gaza is an Iranian proxy under Hamas. They don't care. They don't care that there is no Palestinian constituency or Palestinian political organization that is not also a terrorist organization actively engaged in terrorism. It's very curious. But then, you guys come in with a can-do attitude and you make peace. So, again, if we just want to sort of go to this for a second, why do you think that you were successful? Just because you didn't listen to that?
Well, the truth is, we did listen at the beginning. I listened to everything they had to say. And let's remember, you talk about the peace process is dead. It was dead before we stepped onto the stage. It was dead even during Barack Obama's term. And Barack Obama was probably the most pro Palestinian president ever. They couldn't achieve peace under him. I'm not sure that we had any hope, but our goal was to learn. So we listened to them. We listened to the Palestinian side. We listened to the Israeli side. We listened to all the Arabs. We listened to the Europeans, who are many of them who are terribly anti-Israel. But then we did what we thought was right. We weren't afraid to speak the hard truths. We uncovered the truths. We spoke about the truths. We got a lot of criticism for speaking the truths. And that's eventually how we made progress in two ways. We released a peace plan that we thought was realistic and implementable. Whether it was fair or not, fair is in the eyes of the beholder. And it was criticized, obviously, by some Israelis. It wasn't even looked at by the Palestinian leadership, who said they wished it would be born dead before they even saw a single word of it. And it actually had some pretty good comments on it by many of the Arab countries, very different than the remarks that they've made in the past. So nobody could put down a peace plan that's perfect, certainly not one that's welcomed by both Israelis and Palestinians, let alone the politically divided Israel. I mean, Israel's politically divided like America. But I think we put down a plan that's realistic. The second way we achieved something important is we actually proved that John Kerry and others were wrong when they said there will never be peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors until the Palestinian issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is resolved. That might have been true decades ago. I don't want to speculate whether that was true decades ago. It wasn't true during President Trump's term, and we were lucky to have courageous leaders, Bibi Netanyahu, who actually started that path, the path toward the Abraham Accords, way before we stepped onto the stage, and courageous leaders among the Arab countries, those that signed the Abraham Accords, and some of the ones who didn't yet sign the Abraham Accords.
That was another thing that I wanted to go to, which is the possibility of peace with Saudi Arabia. And like you said, you published your response to Kurtzer, and um, you published your response to Kurtzer and Aaron David Miller at Arab News. And Arab News also just published a very extensive interview with incoming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And he said a couple of things that were very interesting. The first thing that he said that I think is interesting uh, is that he said that there are a lot of important and positive aspects to the Trump peace plan, and that he would want to reference that in future negotiations with the Palestinians. And I think, for me, the reason that it was interesting is because you really see, just like the Biden administration refused to refer to the Trump administration by name and always says our predecessor administration and won't talk about it, and it took them several months or over a year maybe to call the Abraham Accords by name. They always called them the normalization agreements. Um, that they will not reference your peace plan. They never talk about it. They never discuss it. The media in Israel, the overwhelmingly left-wing media in Israel, one should say, is also trying to bury your peace plan. And of course, the Palestinians wouldn't read it, and they want it desperately to be buried. Um, how do you look at first of all, all of the right-thinking people, all the peace processor type people's ardent desire to pretend that there never was a Trump peace plan. And then, what do you make of what Netanyahu is saying, that it can be resuscitated under the circumstances where we have a Biden administration that absolutely doesn't want this peace plan to ever see the light of day?
So the Biden administration removed the peace plan from the White House website, which is a shame. I do have a copy of it. I should actually post it on my website if it's not available publicly anymore. I mean, that's very telling. The fact that they just simply removed it. You're right in pointing out, and it's a very important point. They didn't use the term Abraham Accords and instead used normalization agreements until roughly the time of the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. There's a great clip on YouTube, which your listeners and viewers should watch, of Ned Price, the State Department spokesman, who was, pushed by a journalist. I can't remember which journalist, asking why does he keep referring to these as normalization agreements rather than the Abraham Accords? And he's squirming at the podium, and he keeps saying, "Well, I'm calling them what they are. They're normalization agreements." And finally, he had to very reluctantly utter the words Abraham Accords. But then after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, they say that they embraced the Abraham Accords. And maybe they do. I don't know. But at the moment, there's very little progress that could be made unless if Bibi Netanyahu does form his government coalition. I think he's going to make this a high priority. And I believe that with his input, with his leadership, we do have a chance. I'm not saying Saudi Arabia is going to rush to sign it. I think right now the world has gone crazy. It's not just Ukraine, but Iran. Nobody knows, are we doing a deal with Iran, not doing a deal with Iran? The Iranian threat looms large throughout the region. The region can't rely on the United States of America. The Biden administration has disappointed the region time and time again, not just Israel, but even allies like Saudi and the UAE and others. So I think that Bibi would be the right person to try to shepherd it forward. I think he's the right person to try to convince the Biden administration to try to shepherd it forward. But it's going to take a lot of work and changes of policy in order to make progress during a Biden administration, unless people get comfortable with where the Biden administration is going on Iran and other issues related to Iran.
Well, I mean, the Iranian issue, of course, is being submerged into the fact that Iran is in the throes of a freedom revolution, which hopefully will succeed. So then all bets are off, and we're dealing with a much better and safer world all around. So we should all pray for them. But the thing about the Saudi Israeli peace deal is that I'm kind of hesitant about it. I have to say, the same way that I was hesitant about the Abraham Accords, which is that you know. It's very clear that Israel and Saudi Arabia, under the table, have various forms of cooperation, economic ties, operational ties, and other things. These have all, they're never discussed, but they're very apparent. We had similar ties with Jordan until we signed a peace deal with Jordan. And then all of a sudden you had public pressure all the time on King Hussein and later on King Abdullah because the Jordanian people are extremely hateful towards Israel and oppose the peace with Israel, oppose the normalization of ties with Israel. And that's why we don't have normal ties with Jordan. And so it seems to me that oftentimes if you bring something above the table, you end up getting less from the ties, which are suddenly subjected to public scrutiny by Arab populations that don't like peace with Israel, than you have when it's just the regime, the specific regime having operational bilateral strategic ties with Israel, but they're under the table. So that's one aspect of the prospect of peace with Saudi Arabia that I'm not sure suits Israel's interest. What do you think of that?
So it's kind of a different issue. With Jordan, you have a population that some say is 40, many people say is 70% Palestinian. So it's deeply subsumed in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, the Saudi population is not Palestinian, but they have decades of education that they have to undo in order to make this potential for the Abraham Accords to be possible. But the only way we're going to start that process is by deeply engaging with the Saudis, not just Israel, American Jews, Israel supporters, evangelicals. And I think from the leadership down, it may not be as easy and as quick as it was with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. It may be more akin to what's happening with Morocco, a slow and steady progress. But I think once it's achieved, we're going to see a different result than we've seen with Egypt or Jordan, for that matter. And I think it's definitely worth something that we should be pursuing. But we have to be patient. We have to recognize that so far Saudi's done some really great things. Besides the positive remarks about the Israeli-Palestinian peace plan that President Trump released, they opened up the air corridors to Bahrain and the UAE when the Abraham Accords were signed. This past summer, they opened up all their airspace to Israeli flights. They had their FII, their Future Investment Initiative, confab in Riyadh. This time they actually had Jews and Israelis there openly. Step by step, they're making a lot of progress. We need to be patient. We shouldn't force the issue. We shouldn't constantly demand things of them. But Saudi society is changing so dramatically and so quickly. Every time I go there, I'm sort of amazed at the different changes that are occurring. I remain optimistic, but it's going to take time, much longer than it took for the Abraham Accords, unless something dramatic changes.
And that's another thing, I look at these normalization accords and I like the term Abrahamic, but the normalization to me is really what it's all about. I mean, we have ostensible peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, but we don't have ties with them. We don't have normalization of ties. So it's not real peace. A true peace is a peace where you have a normalization of ties, where you have it just people take it for granted that we're at peace with one another and they can go about and do their things. And then that also raises the question, why do we need an agreement at all? Why can't we just develop ties? Why do we have to have anything formal at all? If we already have ties with Saudi Arabia, then why should we pursue them? We already have them.
It's definitely true. We should do, first of all, we should approach it any which way we can, but the step by step approach that you're talking about, the normalization process rather than a big fanfare ceremony, might be the way to do it. I will say, well before the Abraham Accords happened, a few people came to our offices and said, why don't we do a non belligerent agreement between Israel and the UAE and Israel and Saudi and all that? They thought that would be a major political win. I was very against that because the truth is there wasn't really a belligerent situation. There was a lack of normalization. There were under the table ties, talks, security cooperation. But I thought that would set things in the wrong direction to have an agreement that said, okay, we won't attack each other. And I'm glad I did that because ultimately we got something far better. But what you're suggesting is not a negative thing like a non-belligerency agreement. It's simply building ties over time, learning each other, working with each other, trusting, learning to trust each other, and eventually trusting each other, and then things happen.
It's true. And and you mentioned in your thing, well, we should have more ties with Israeli Jews, American Jews. And one of the things that I know it troubled you as well. We talked about it when I saw you at the White House during your time in office. Um, is how appalled the American Jewish community was towards Trump and hateful towards Trump, and still is to a very large degree. And first of all, I wanted to just know, while you were in office and you were facing this wall of hatred from your fellow Jews in the United States towards the administration that you were serving, that was doing so many good things for Israel and for American Jews, for that matter. How did you look at this? How did it make you feel? And how did you respond to it as a very prominent Jew, as a very open Jew, Orthodox Jew in the Trump administration, facing this kind of hatred, really, from the vast majority of American Jews?
Well, you learn to grow a thick skin. Actually, my first thick skin had to do not even with people blaming Trump of being an anti Semite, wrongly so, of course, or enabling anti Semitism. Oddly enough, my first thick skin lesson had to do with what people call settlements, what I like to call cities, towns, and neighborhoods. I was the best friend that the so called settlements had in the White House until David joined, and then David and I, David Friedman, my good friend, sort of worked together hand in hand with it. But for a period of time, because of certain statements that were made by not by me but others. There was a time when a group of people from, I'm not sure where in the Gush, they wanted to picket my house in Teaneck. They wanted to do a big protest in front of my house because they thought that I was against the cities, towns, and neighborhoods of Yehuda and Shomron, of Judea and Samaria, which is a bit shocking to me given my stance and my position on these cities, towns, and neighborhoods. So I learned very quickly that people either misunderstand, are misled, or say the wrong things for whatever reason. That protest never ended up happening. I called a friend of mine and they explained who I was and what I stood for, and the people stood down. But then it morphed right away into anti Semitism, wrongful accusations against Trump. I'm a guy who worked for Trump for 20 years before I joined him at the White House. He's not anti Semitic. He doesn't enable anti Semitism. The news media manipulates things around him. Now, I will say, I think his dinner with Kanye and Fuentes was a mistake. I think he should have condemned those two people. I think he had ample opportunity to do so. And the more Kanye said, or Ye as he likes to be called, the more crazy things Ye said after that dinner, the more opportunity President Trump had to condemn it. I'm disappointed that he didn't condemn it. I hope one day he does it. But that's a different issue. Most of the time, he's been attacked as being an anti Semite or being an enabler of anti Semitism. He's been an incredible advocate against anti Semitism. He said the strongest messages against anti Semitism as probably better than most presidents have ever said. He obviously ripped up the Iran deal, which was an existential threat to the Jewish state of Israel. So I think we have to stand tall and proud. And I could say that Fuentes and Kanye's dinner was a mistake, but at the same time say President Trump has been a tremendous friend to the Jewish people and a tremendous friend to the Jewish state of Israel.
I couldn't agree more. I just the animosity that's been directed against Trump, and I completely agree with you also on your criticism of his dinner with Kanye West and with Fuentes, um, who really are execrable people. But I the way that the Jewish community has been treating Trump all along, basically since he secured the Republican nomination, maybe before that, I can't remember, but certainly from then on and throughout his term in office has been, I think, incredibly unfair and to the point and self-destructive to the point where they're making people who want to support Israel leery of it because they don't understand what's going on in the Jewish community. When you look at it all, what do you make of what's going on in the Jewish community? Do you think that they don't support Israel? I mean, do you think that American Jewish leaders like the ADL and the other groups that were just such outspoken partisans against really the best president Israel has ever experienced, is because they just don't care?
I don't think it's that they don't care. I think unfortunately is they allow Israel to be used as a political football. And that's something we should fight back on. There are people who um, force things on donors, big voices, force these organizations to do things. If they hate Trump and they want to support the Democrats, they're going to make sure that those organizations have policies that are not supportive of Trump and everything that he's done and use every angle that they possibly can to attack Trump. Jonathan Greenblatt and I don't agree on a lot of different things. We often get confused on Twitter. It's actually very funny, maybe because we're both hair challenged, but there are many times that Jonathan's statements anti Trump are attributed to me. Um, I
I
think
think
the
it might have to do more with your last name being the exact same last name than your hair situation or lack thereof.
right. I think we need to do a better job explaining to these organizations that they have to stand tall and proud as Jews, tall and proud as Israel supporters, and ignore the politics. Because the more we let people use us and allow Israel to be used as a political football, it's terrible for the Jews. It's tied to the growth of anti Semitism here and around the world. It's terrible for the United States of America. And it's terrible for Israel and its Arab neighbors. But the problem is we're not
See,
fighting it hard enough, and Trump is a bit of a lightning rod, which makes this task all the more challenging.
well, that's actually, why don't we just go there for a second? What can be done? I mean, I'm just writing about it, and I spoke about it in my opening for today's show. The Amcha initiative just posted a very important report that was talking about the fact that what we're seeing on college campuses is not simply, assaults against Jewish students by anti-Semites, Palestinian supporters, BDS campaigners, what have you. What we're seeing is an all-out assault on Jewish identity, almost so very reminiscent of the Hellenized Jews and the Greek assault on Jewish identity during the time of the Maccabees. Um, and this is an existential threat to the Jewish community. Um, and yet we see that all of these major Jewish groups with multi-million dollar budgets are acting as partisan organizations, and as a result are not actually willing to fight, and are not capable, perhaps are incapable of fighting anti-Semitism. Do you think that they're capable of fighting anti-Semitism? I mean,
It's hard to tell. This trouble has happened so rapidly and so intensely, and it's so vast all of a sudden. I mean, how many weeks ago was it? I never thought in my life I'd have this conversation with my wife and kids when New Jersey synagogues were threatened. Turned out to be, one individual, but at the time we didn't know what it was. And I asked my wife and kids, should we go to a basement minyan down the block instead of our main synagogue? In my lifetime, I'm turning 56 this year or next year. I never thought I'd ask my wife and my kids or myself if I could go to a synagogue in New Jersey, right? So we've had some dramatic changes over the last period of time. Yes, anti-Semitism has existed, but over the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, 4 years, it's grown tremendously. People want to hide their head in the sand and blame Trump. They're looking at the wrong um, they're looking at the wrong guilty parties. We should be fighting the guilty parties and not trying to throw blame on Trump or other people who may not be helping in the best possible way, but aren't the cause of it and aren't going to be the solution.
I mean, yeah, I'm just looking. I posted, I retweeted this today. Walt Whitman High School. I think it's in either Rockville, Maryland, or Potomac. It's Bethesda, Maryland. And on the entrance to they have a big sign at the entrance to the high school. This is a public high school in an area with lots and lots and lots of Jews in Montgomery County in suburban Maryland, and somebody spray painted right on the huge brick and concrete sign at the entrance to Walt Whitman's high school, "Jews not welcome." And these really are things that our generation in the United States never experienced, and yet you're seeing this over and over and over again, all over, and it's just expanding all the time. It's just growing all the time. In Jersey City, you had a massacre of Jews at a kosher supermarket by Black Hebrew Israelites. And then you have the white supremacists in Poway and in Pittsburgh, and it just seems like Jews are getting it from all sides, and yet these major Jewish organizations seem paralyzed by their partisan identity. And in the meantime, they accuse Israel of siding with the Republicans because the Republicans are pro-Israel, and it's a very distressing time right now in American Jewish life, and also, of course, in American Jewish ties with Israel.
Right. Well, what should happen, what these organizations should be doing, in the example, the Walt Whitman example, is reaching out to the Jewish community there and saying, hey, we're here for you. What can we do? What can we do for your kids? How do we give you comfort? How do we strengthen you? How do we strengthen your Jewish identity? I don't know if any of them are doing that. We did that with the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue. President Trump dispatched me and Avi Berkowitz right after it happened. I met with the students, I met with the teachers. President Trump then came with Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin and Ivanka Trump and made a really important speech there. I will note that there were people protesting Trump as an anti-Semite. So as he was there making remarks about those who would destroy the Jews, he will seek to destroy them. Really strong language. In the far distance, I don't know how many people were there. You heard people protesting Trump. Somehow we have to figure out a way to work together, whether it's Republican, Democrat, left, right, doesn't matter. We have to unify ourselves because if we don't, it's going to get much worse for us. We may not all agree on Israel. We may not agree on certain aspects of religion and certain aspects of society, but we have to agree on fighting anti Semitism, working together, even where we don't agree with other policies. Otherwise, I think it's just going to get significantly worse.
Do you think that Israel can do more to help than it's already doing? And if so, what sort of thing would you want the incoming Netanyahu government to do to help the American Jewish community withstand this growing tsunami of Jew hatred that's coming in all of these different forms and threatening the basic civil rights of American Jews to be Jews in America?
So it's a really interesting question. I guess I'll go back to the Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue. Naftali Bennett at the time, I think he was education minister or minister of diaspora, I can't remember. He was there at the same
He was
time.
both.
Sorry?
He was both. He was education minister and minister of diaspora affairs, and he was in
He was
America
there.
to
He
express
was there.
solidarity with the Jews of Pittsburgh.
Yep, very important. Ron Dermer came with President Trump. Ron was the ambassador at the time, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. He got criticized for being, tied to the Trump administration, when in fact he was going there to show support for the community. I think it meant a lot to the community that they were both there, and I think Israel can definitely do more, certainly for our college students. I think we in America do a terrible job with our college students. We're not educating them enough. We're not giving them the tools with which to stand on in order to fight anti-Semitism, in order to fight anti-Israel sentiment. We need to do a much better job, and who better to help us on it than the Israeli government?
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I just harkened back to my days in Colombia in the 1980s during the first Intifada, and we had Uri Savir, who was the consul general in New York, and he really was not very supportive of the Jews on Columbia campus that were getting mauled by the Arab community and by anti-Israel professors, and we really just sort of had to do it all on our own, and it was a shame because we were looking towards the Israeli consulate for support, and we didn't receive it because of that, and so I'm hoping that Israel under the new government is going to be able to do more for the American Jews, but I I I just find it so distressing that you see so many American Jews who just seem to be as a Jew Jews. As a Jew, I'm embarrassed of Israel. I feel uncomfortable with the Israeli government. I saw, Abe Foxman coming out and saying, "I'm not going to support this government if it does A, B, and C. If it adopts policies for which the Israeli people elected it." It makes me wonder whether they want to have continued ties with Israel.
Well, we ignore this at our own peril, right? We could say these people are bad people, all these kids who are being indoctrinated with anti Israel sentiment, or we could approach them and try to educate them. Not all of them are going to agree with us, but right now we're working with our hands tied behind our back because these kids are getting fed all these things by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so many other places, and they're not getting the other side. I think that if we don't make this effort, again, it's our problem. It's a U.S. problem, but it really hurts Israel at the same time. I think we should join forces, American Jewish leadership, evangelical leadership, Israel, the Israeli government, and others join forces and figure out a way to educate these kids. And not just these kids, by the way, their parents. So many people just for whatever reason don't understand the reality of Israel, don't understand the reality of the Israeli Palestinian conflict. Some of them never heard about the Abraham Accords or don't even know its significance and importance. Could I blame them for the positions that they take? I guess not, because this is what they've been fed over the years. Well, let's unfeed that. Let's feed them the truth. Let's feed them a completely different lesson plan. And hopefully, many of them will take it to heart and change their approach.
Oftentimes when I was writing about the Trump administration during its years, and also when I was writing about the Obama administration and the Bush administration, but I mean, I felt specifically during Trump's years in office, and with you at his side, with Jared Kushner and David Friedman here, I found that the most uh, there were two striking distinctions between the way that you guys were going about doing things towards Israel and the Arabs, and the way that all of your predecessors in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party went about doing them, which was that you were basing your policies on realities on the ground, and like you said, going back to the Gaza the situation on the ground in Gaza, the reality of Gaza, that Gaza is Hamas stand, that it is a terror state controlled by a terrorist organization and supported and sponsored by Iran. Um, that you guys just used reality to as a basis for your policies, and your predecessors used um, used used empty terms like two-state solution to guide their policies, and that the reason that you guys succeeded where they failed was because you were actually having reality-based foreign policies instead of fantasy-based foreign policies. How do you explain this tendency on both sides of the aisle, really, to predicate American foreign policy on fantasy? I mean, it's quite stunning when you look at it that they will not look at reality. They don't want to. It's too bothersome. How do you explain this? Is the most powerful nation in the world, and yet it has, for decades, based its Middle East policy on a fantasy that there's this silver bullet for all of the pathologies of the entire region, and that is an Israeli territorial surrender to all of the PLO's, not all, but all of their first stage demands in Judea and Samaria and in Israel. What is it driving? What is driving this? How do you explain it?
It's multiple factors, but maybe the most important factor I could explain is that for diplomats, um, it's easier to do nothing, right? It's easier just to keep things moving. One of the past peace processors, I don't want to say who, came to see me at the White House and said, "You guys are making too many waves. Your first job should be do no harm. Just go with the flow, and soon enough, your time will be over and everything will be fine. You're not going to change anything anyway. So don't rock the boat." And my answer to him was, listen, I didn't leave my wife and kids in New Jersey and take a tremendous salary cut just to be here and bide my time. We came here to make progress. And if we don't make progress, fine, but at least we know we tried. Diplomats are often not courageous. They have jobs to protect. They work for leaderships that are often trying to focus on their own countries. So they're unwilling to have frank conversations. We were also very lucky. We worked for a unique president, right? He says what he thinks, sometimes to his detriment, but he wasn't interested in not saying what he thinks. And without exception in the Arab countries, and certainly with Bibi Netanyahu, when we first started meeting them, we said, "Do you want to hear from us like diplomats and just tell you some nice things and you tell us some nice things and we leave the room? Or do you want to hear what we really think and allow us to make progress if we can make progress?" Without exception, they were interested in what I explained to them, the Yiddish word tachlis. They wanted to discuss tachlis. They wouldn't commit to achieving tachlis, to achieving progress, to achieving results, but none of them were interested in us just coming in and wasting their time or our time with speaking, the usual talking points and then just leaving the room. They were very interested in hearing our thoughts. We earned their trust. They earned our trust. And I think that's the key issue here. Don't be afraid. If any of your listeners or viewers are interested in eventually in going into government, don't be afraid. You have to speak diplomatically, of course, politely, respectfully, observe all the norms of the diplomatic meetings, but don't be afraid to speak your mind. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. Don't be afraid to challenge. And that's pretty much the way we approach things.
I mean, I can understand what you're saying about inertia and not wanting to get in trouble and not wanting to, walk away from the crowd, and going along to get along. But there's a fervor. There's a fervor involved in the way that the likes of Kurtzer and David Miller and their colleagues like Tom Friedman and others speak about the need for a two-state solution, the need to never put it aside, the need to never let Israel move past, uh, this starting point where everything that we do is wrong in Judea and Samaria. I mean, Tom Friedman, he wrote this in his latest article. He quoted B'Tselem statistics, which are, have been proven wrong and propaganda based over and over and over again. And they said in the last year, 20 Israelis were killed and 150 Palestinians. But as my friend Hanan Amior from who runs Camera's office in Israel wrote on Twitter today, rightly, almost 100% of those 150 were Palestinian terrorists engaged in terrorist violence or attacking Israeli military forces in Judea and Samaria. So they use this number 150 to make it sound like Israel is just as evil as the Palestinians, who are always unnamed, and culpable morally for the killing of Palestinian terrorists, um, because they want to have a moral equivalence between Israel and Palestinian terrorists. And if there isn't a moral equivalence, then it's because Israel is the bad guy. And which is what they're pushing now with this idea that the democratically elected Israeli government, which just wants to advance the national interests of Israel at home and abroad, is fascist. And that there's something inherently racist about the Jewish national home. So you look at this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, it's very difficult as a practical matter to dismiss the concept that there's a lot of anti-Semitism involved in this generational obsession with Israel and the Palestinians, as if this is the true belief, the continued belief that this is the be all and end all, even though you guys proved with the Abraham Accord that it is a side issue.
So it ranges, right? There are some people who are well meaning and terribly misguided and just making the wrong policy choices. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are people, and the way you describe it is correct. It's anti Semitism, anti Israel. Some of them would like nothing more than combine it into a one state, give everyone equal rights, and see what happens. And they lie, they deceive, they manipulate. Look at the New York Times article. I think it came out yesterday. I just read it this morning. It was by the editorial board, not by Tom Friedman. 99% of the article was blame Israel, Israel's bad. Only at the very bottom do they address the fact that peace can't be achieved for, among other reasons, corruption among the Palestinian Authority and a couple of other words I can't remember. It barely scratched the surface on it. And it belonged front and center. It didn't belong there as a footnote. It was their way of kind of saying, yeah, my article was fair. I addressed the Palestinian shortcomings. Another example I could give you, just going back, after President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital, I think before, maybe after he moved the embassy, I was in a conference. I can't say who was in the room, but one of the bold-faced names who's writes on or reports on or is an expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over many years, asked the question of why President Trump didn't exact a penalty out of Israel, demand certain concessions from Israel in order to recognize Jerusalem as the capital. And I said, and I think this person was taken aback when I answered this way. I asked if he was familiar with the Jerusalem Embassy Act. I said, the Jerusalem Embassy Act says three things. One, Jerusalem, undivided capital, recognize it. Two, move the embassy. And three, the only exception to doing that is if the president thinks there's a reason for national security to sign a waiver not to follow law. It doesn't say, oh, and when you do it, demand that Israel give up things to the Palestinians. It has nothing to do with it had nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The very notion that you could ask that question, you who are so steeped in the so-called knowledge of the conflict and are held out as an expert on this conflict, the fact that you asked me that question shows either you don't understand it and you didn't look at it, you didn't take the time to read it, or you have deep-rooted reasons to fight Israel and to fight truth and to fight reality. It wasn't a very friendly audience in the conference, so I think I was the only one that appreciated my answer.
Well, I appreciate your remarks, and I'm not saying that, oh, I'll be your friend, but I mean, it's a disturbing situation where pointing. One of the beautiful things about what you guys did was that you just went with you just told the plain truth. Look, I mean, we have a law. We're supposed to follow the law. There's no ulterior motive here, because the fact is that everything that America has granted Israel has always, come with a price exacted. And I think that the Kurtzer Miller op-ed in the Washington Post was saying, okay, we're just going to extract a price now for no Israeli concessions. We want the Israeli payment up front because we just don't like Israel. And my feeling was really that what it really shows is that these two men just really are hostile to Israel. Maybe they like the Israeli left, but they would like the Israeli left because the Israeli left is willing to weaken Israel. And that goes to the last question that I really want to ask you. I mean, I heard, um, I had a conversation during the Bush years that always stuck with me with somebody who was a member of was a senior a Jewish member of the administration, whose name I'm not going to give publicly, but he said to me, you know, Israel is going to endanger its democratic stature or position as a democracy if it applies its laws to any part of Judea and Samaria because of demography. Never mind the whole demographic issue is not at all clear. There's certainly indications over the past 20 years that the Palestinians have systematically inflated their population rolls by 50% and continue to do so to this day. Um, but he said, we only support Israel because it's a democracy. And I said, what do you mean? I mean, you support Israel because Israel has a right to exist and because Israel is a Jewish state and it shares the same values of the United States and because the United States is most loyal and most powerful ally in the Middle East. Why do you say that you only support Israel because it's this it's a democracy in the way that you want to define it? Because that means that you you're saying that it's not that there's nothing special about Israel. And then you saw them saying, okay, we're going to bring democracy everywhere. We're going to make 100 different Israels. Iraq is going to be in Israel too. And Afghanistan is going to be in Israel too. And it seemed like there was this effort by these very senior American Jews to say Israel is nothing special. And there was another aspect to that which I felt very strongly, which was at the same time during the Bush administration, there was this very messianic concept that the Americans were going to, bring democracy all over the world, and that America was, um, a lot of people, I remember Jim Woolsey and many others were quoting Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural and talking about America being the almost chosen land. And I had this sense all the time that these very senior American Jews in the Bush administration were uncomfortable with Israel actually being the promised land and that they wanted very much for America to be the promised land because then then they would be the most important Jews in the world and not the Israeli Jews. And it's just been this lingering sense that I've gotten all along that American Jews are uncomfortable with Israel being a successful regional power, being prosperous, not being weak and needy of charity all the time to survive. That there's this sense of displacement that also plays into it, that they want to remain the most important Jewish community in the world.
So, if that's true, I don't know if that's true today, but if it's true, makes me think again about our job. And our job is to educate people because having a powerful Israel, the way Israel has managed to become after, against all odds, right? Being attacked time and time again, wars, terror attacks from the moment of its existence. Having Israel there, the Jewish state of Israel, is the best weapon any Jew around the world needs. And we need to get rid of Israel as the victim, or frankly, even the Jew as the victim approach. But that goes back to our job of educating people in a completely different manner. And I know you mentioned it's the last question, but because of education, I just want to mention to your listeners something that you taught me, which is really, really important. It's more of an Israeli issue than it is an American issue. I'm not sure we can help, but in Israel, they should focus on it. You had come to me and showed me how the Palestinians are building around Israeli communities and usurping land. And nobody ever talks, when they talk about settlements, they say, oh, Israelis are grabbing land and they're building and there won't be a two-state solution because of Israel. Nobody ever talks about Palestinian settlements, if we could use that term. People should be focused on it. And related to that are the land grabs, mostly funded by Europeans, perhaps others, the land grabs because of this strange way that the laws work in Judea and Samaria, where Palestinians can simply plant or occupy, put a bench. I don't really know. I'm not so familiar with the terminology, but swaths of land. And it's becoming more and more and more of a problem. I don't know why the Israeli government wasn't focused on that, but I think you guys should raise your voices hard to make sure that the Israeli government fights against what's happening. The occupation of, I'll say Israeli land, but let's call it at best disputed land by the Palestinians, Palestinian settlement building. I think it's a really, really important factor in the conflict. And if there will be a solution one day, this is only going to complicate it further.
I obviously couldn't agree with you more. I came to you with I think it was Regavim's study of Palestinian land grabs in Area C, and we talked about just how devastating this is for for Israel's future and for the capacity of Israel and the Palestinians to be able to reach any sort of accord that would give the Palestinians continued autonomy and self-government in Judea and Samaria, and allow Israel to continue to uh, protect and defend Jewish rights in parts of Judea and Samaria, and asserted security control over the areas that are vital for its national security. So I appreciate you very much for raising that. I know that the incoming government actually, has, and this is, the last point that I'd like you to talk about. These are things that are pressing national security concern, and they also negatively affect any chance for peace between Israel and the Palestinians in the future. And yet, and this is one of the many things that the incoming government was elected by Israeli voters to protect. The land use in Area C, and ending massive European funded, as you said, Palestinian land grabs in areas all around Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. I know my community of Farad is being increasingly encircled by this. Um, and we're a very major community in
Anytime
Gush
talk
Etzion.
about Israeli settlements being an obstacle to peace, ask them about Palestinian settlements, ask them about the Palestinian land grabs, and figure out a way to stop the Europeans from further complicating the problem.
Right. So all I was going to say was that, one of the preemptive assaults on the incoming government is over this, right? Because it's an attempt to preemptively deter the incoming Netanyahu government for doing the things that it was elected to do. It's being demonized because it campaigned on something that must be done as an imperative for ever having peaceful coexistence in the long term between Israel and the Palestinians.
Indeed.
Yeah. Care to comment?
I think, first of all, prejudging Bibi Netanyahu's government is just dead wrong. I think that this government was elected, as you say, to deal with these kinds of problems. They are real problems. Those who don't understand it here, we need to educate. Those who understand it and are fighting it are just against Israel. And we need to raise our voices loud and strong. We are fighting a battle here and around the world worse than ever before. So I hope that the Israeli government focuses on it. They shouldn't let some nasty articles in the New York Times, Washington Post, or other mainstream media deter them from doing it. They should expose the truth. One of the things that I was happy to hear is you're not saying that you eventually don't hope for peace. You think it's unlikely, that's okay. But in your answer, you didn't say Palestinians need to move out forever, etc. That's something that won't be listened to here. But you were acknowledging the reality of the situation and acknowledging how addressing the reality of the situation may allow for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. That's the education that we need to give people here, and it's sorely lacking.
Well, I appreciate that. Look, I mean, I think the truth is that I think maybe my view of peace with the Palestinians is very similar to my view of peace with all of the Arab states, which is that let's just work on having better relations. Let's just work on them not killing us, and them not stoning us on the roads, them not shooting on us at the roads, them not coming into our bars and shooting at people who are out for drinks with their friends, and so on and so forth. Let's work on that, and then we can see what happens. But until we've got that settled, and they stop actively seeking to kill Jews, we're not talking about a situation that lends itself very well to the concept of peace. But it does lend itself well to the concept of asserting your rights and protecting them, because that's how you secure your future and open up a prospect for peace. And by the way, just insofar as kicking out the Arabs from Judea and Samaria, I mean, not even the furthest right component of the incoming government is advocating on behalf of that. Itamar Ben-Gvir said he does not support that, and this is just one of the many things that the left in Israel and in the United States is lying about to try to demonize this government. Anyway, we should wrap up. But Jason, I did just want to thank you very much for coming on the program, and most of all, I want to thank you for your service in the Trump administration and all the wonderful things that you and your colleagues were able to accomplish for the Middle East and peace of the Middle East, and also for the Jews of America, and obviously in Israel. So I wanted to thank you, and I'll have you back over the next several months, I hope, and we can talk about more of these issues and as they unfold. So thank you very much.
Honored to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, and we'll see you again in just next week. I think we're going to have Yoram Chazoni on for that book. But we will see you later. And Chag Sameach, Chanukah Sameach to you, Jason, and to all of you listeners and viewers of the Caroline Glick Show. We should be like the Maccabees, and we should protect who we are and work to maintain and to strengthen our Jewish identity for ourselves, for our children, and for posterity. So thank you very much, and Chag Sameach to all of you.
Amen. Chag Sameach.